Chapter 13. Von Baer and His Embryos. Quote, if I could study an organism from its very beginning, if I could watch it from the very first instant, the sperm enters the egg, and study all the stages that it passes through until it becomes a complete adult, then I might understand how an animal's body is built, and this surely is one of the most extraordinary things in nature. Unquote. This, in substance, is what Carl Ernst von Baer said. Von Baer knew, of course, that among the simpler organisms, reproduction is brought about by cell division. But with the plants that are more complex, and with the animals in which he was especially interested, there was a sexual union of male and female, and how the body developed from this union was a matter that no one up to von Baer's time had been able to find out. There have been many guesses, but for the hidden and mysterious development of life has always fascinated those who contemplate it. Aristotle had considered it. He believed that flies and mice were generated from filth, to be sure, but he had watched the growth of the chick in a hen's egg. The first two books on his natural history were written on the subject and illustrated with drawings. In the Middle Ages, a monk wrote that if you put some bran, some cheese, and some old rags in a corner, mice would be born from them. At that time, it was not uncommon for people to believe that if a woman was put under a spell, she might give birth to kittens or puppies. William Harvey, whose great work was on the circulation of the blood, would, of course, have nothing to do with such notions. Quote, all things come from the egg, unquote, he said in 1651, but he had never seen the egg of a mammal. He had merely made a shrewd guess. The microscope helped more than anything else to solve the mystery of reproduction, but even with the microscope, understanding was slow in coming. Malpighi in the 17th century had peered down at the tiny pulsating speck in a hen's egg and thought he could see in it a tiny chick with heart and lungs, head, wings, and legs all nicely folded. The only thing needed was some stimulus to make the egg hatch. At that time, it was not even known that this must be a tangible thing. It might simply be a kind of immaterial impulse, invisible yet effective. The idea that the embryo contained the perfect adult form in miniature was called preformation. It led to great discussion, for what was true of a chick would undoubtedly be true for any other living creature, a human being, for instance. If the being inside the egg was complete in all its parts, then it must have an ovary and eggs of its own. And if such eggs were there, they in turn could contain other complete beings. So they would all be folded one inside the other, tinier and tinier, down to the most minute little creature imaginable. If that was true, it was said that Eve, the first woman, must have had inside her body the minute forms of all men and women that ever were to be, and every one of them complete, with head and arms and legs. One writer estimated that the number of them might be 27 million. In 1679, the eunuch made a great discovery. He saw through the lens of his microscope some little moving organisms with whipping tails, which he later identified as spermatozoa. It was because he had the theory of preformation clearly in his mind that he said he could see the form of a little man in the sperm. As time went on, botanists talked of male and female in the growth of plants, and they talked of preformation in these too. They imagined the complete bean vines neatly folded inside the bean, the oak trees inside the acorn. All plants seemed to them to be like the paper flowers the Japanese so cleverly insert in capsules, which spread out when they are dropped into a glass of water. Not all the scientists believed in preformation. As the 17th century passed into the 18th century and the 18th into the 19th century, more and more of them believed that living things were created in another way. They talked of epigenesis, And by that term, they meant that the simplest form becomes progressively more complex as it grows, that the egg changes somehow into the embryo, that the embryo develops and grows until it becomes a plant, a fish, a rabbit, or a human being. This was the state of things when Karl Ernst von Baer began his embryological work. He was a German who had been born in Estonia on the Baltic Sea. He had studied at various German universities, and because his friend Christian Heinrich Ponder was teaching at the University of St. Petersburg in Russia, he too obtained a professor's post at that university. Up to the time von Baer started his researches, no one had ever seen the ovum or egg of a mammal. Eggs of birds, fish, and reptiles were common enough, and theoretically everyone agreed that there must be such a thing as a mammalian ovum. So von Baer began at the very beginning. He searched for the egg of a mammal. Von Baer did not use a microscope, although his eyes were not very good. He started by dissecting a great many different kinds of animals. After he had searched a long time, he found what he was looking for. He found in the ovary of a rabbit a tiny gray speck, yet big enough to see with his naked eye. So that was it. But he was not content with finding only one. He went on with his search. There was, he discovered, an ovum in the ovary of a dog, and finally he was satisfied, but not surprised, to find one in the body of a human being. So he had proved that mammals, though they give birth to their young in living form, the biologists talk of mammals as viviparous, nevertheless emerge, as Harvey had said, from an egg. Here was another proof of the unity of all living things: the seeds of plants, the eggs of fish, reptiles, and birds, the ova of mammals. But how, von Baer asked next, is it possible for this tiny speck I have seen to grow into an embryo? What happens? With this problem, his friend Christian Heinrich Ponder was able to help him. Ponder, too, had been fascinated by the problem of how a fertilized egg develops into an embryo, and had worked out a theory which biologists still hold today. As the egg has been fertilized, said Ponder, it divides into two parts. The two parts divide into four, the four into 16, and so on. Finally, they form themselves into a hollow sphere called a blastula. The blastula then grows longitudinally. The walls approach each other and become flattened, and then a third, middle layer grows between the upper and lower one. The three layers now lie one on top of the other. Ponder calls them Blätter, the German word for leaves. Since these leaves or layers are the germs of new life, he also called them germ layers. Now, as the germ layers grow, they start to curl inward and fold themselves. And as a piece of paper might be folded by a child to make a little boat or hat, so the germ layers are folded to make up the various parts of the body. One folds itself around until it makes a tube which will hold the embryo. In this, another folds itself to make the alimentary canal and vital organs. Another makes the bony frame or skeleton, and another the skin. So the tiny germinal leaves curl and stretch, fold themselves and grow until the complete embryo is formed. In his laboratory in St. Petersburg, von Baer collected a large number of embryos and put them in alcohol, set the glass jars in rows on the shelves of his laboratory. Each one was carefully labeled. As the collection grew, he became more and more interested in seeing that in the earliest stages of their development, all embryos look much alike. He wrote, quote, "Are not all animals in the beginning of their development essentially alike, and is there not a primary form common to all?" Unquote. Still, though it was evident to him that the embryonic forms were all somehow related, he could never accept the theory of evolution. Darwin, however, was greatly interested in the following passage in von Baer's writings, quote, "The embryos of mammals, of birds, Insects and snakes are, in their earlier stages, exceedingly like one another, both as a whole and in the mode of development of their parts. Indeed, we can often distinguish such embryos only by their size. I have two little embryos in spirit in which I have omitted to attach the names. I am now quite unable to say to what class they belong. They may be lizards, or small birds, or very young mammals. So complete is the similarity of the mode of development of the head of and trunk of these animals. The extremities are still absent, but even if present, we should learn nothing from them in this early stage of development, for the feet of lizards and mammals, the wings and feet of birds, no less than the hands and feet of men, originate in the same fundamental plan. Unquote. As he worked, observing his embryos, it appeared that sometimes organs developed and disappeared again. Thus, every embryo, after about 20 days, had the gill slits of a fish, but in most mammals, these slits disappeared from the embryo was more than a few weeks old. In all the animals, there seemed to have been a tail, but in men this disappeared before birth. In human beings, however, some organs, such as the appendix, were preserved, although their function was not understood. Ernst Haeckel, who was Darwin's great admirer in Germany, thought the stages through which the individual embryo passes are a recapitulation of the history of the race. He wrote, quote, "The individual repeats during the rapid and short course of its development the most important of the form changes which its ancestors traversed during the long and slow course of their paleontological evolution." No. Most modern biologists do not believe that this is true, although the theory is often repeated. The work that von Baer did with his embryos is, however, another matter. His discovery of mammalian ova, his brilliant conception of the germ plasm, his proof of the likeness of men and animals in their early stages, these are the foundation stones on which modern embryologists work.